Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, I guess.
Just surviving a little bit as best as you can. Are you missing Egan right now?
Kinda, yeah. I've been writing about like who we're gonna see in training camp, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm sure this. I've never seen them before. And I still like have. There's no. And this isn't a knock on the Vikings. It's obviously just a problem with the situation. But there's like no schedule. Like there's no like order of operations for what I need to do or for what any media needs to do in order to get to the players and just like watch them or talk to them or whatever. Some teams already have media showing up. Some teams don't. It's very weird, but yeah, I'm going crazy.
It does seem like, well, because this is your thing. This is the place that you go in your Captain America shirt and get to hang out with the other bloggers, a bit like dogs at a dog park. Like, this is your moment, and unfortunately, you're having it taken from you this year. And I feel for you. I do. Welcome to this episode.
So genuine.
Hey, if I am good at anything, it is faking being genuine, and I am really trying to skirt that line a little bit. Wait,
which ex-wife agrees with you?
Well, I was often wrong is the thing I have learned from all of that, so we're not going to touch that. However, we are going to welcome all of you back to Norse Code. We are going to be going over a couple of things, including the Rick Spielman extension, the trade that wasn't. We have a special mailbag, and we have a special Patreon mailbag, actually, if you subscribe to Patreon. And then after that, we have our regular mailbag as well. But before we start, just want to thank everyone so much for listening, for sending links out on social media, for spreading the word about Norse Code. We hope you enjoyed the Patreon preview episode that we posted last episode, where at the very end of it, you got about half an hour of bonus content that you would normally receive over at patreon.com/NorseCode. So if you are interested in more Arif and James, you can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode, and for $3.50 a month, you too can access all sorts of bonus material, including completely unrelated to real football episodes. Here we have a Patreon mailbag, which will be included in the middle of the show if you are subscribed to Patreon. Or we are also putting up a couple of things, including possibly a Norse Code Fantasy League for the Patreon people. This is in discussion, so we have enough people. It's that it might actually be a necessary thing this year, which is also to say, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it's time once again to open up the lottery for the Norse Code League. If you are interested in joining the world's worst fantasy league, and by worst, I mean greatest, you can email me at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And just with that, your email's already on there. That's all I need. Or you can go and DM me on Twitter at norsecodedn. That's our Twitter account, right? Yes, at norsecodedn. As the person who's been in charge of that for 6.5 years, I feel like I should know that, but here we are. So at norsecodedn, just DM me there, include your email address, and I will put you in the lottery for a number of spots that we are going to have open this year. It is always fun. This is the fantasy league where it is negative 25 points for a missed extra point. You've never truly played fantasy if you haven't had this rule in your league before. It will completely change you, for better or for worse, but it'll change your whole experience.
It certainly will change you.
It will change you. That much is certain. But Norse Code Fantasy League is back this year once again. I missed it so much, and it's coming back. So if you are interested in it, again, norsecodepodcast@gmail.com to enter into the lottery, or you can DM me on Twitter at norsecodedn, and I will add you to the group there. We literally had people at like 12:05 Mountain Time or Eastern Time, whatever it was, like send in a message, because I said it was going to open up in August. It was going to open up in August. Like, can I get in the league? Can I get in the like? People are pounding down the door to try to get into this league, and you too can be a part of the. Is excitement the right word? Is excitement?
Yeah, excitement is like, because it can mean anything positive or negative, and certainly the league incurs strong positive and or negative emotions. So, yeah, I think excitement's the right word here.
Whenever we refer to the Norse Code League, I will forever think of the screenshot that I put up to advertise the league.
Incredible. Oh my God.
It was so beautiful. It could bring a tear to a glass eye. It was, I forget what week it was last year, but there was a matchup between two teams that both kickers were just terrible that game. One had missed 3 extra points, and the other, I think, had missed 2. But according to Yahoo, despite the fact that the guy who had like negative 77 points as a player, his team still had a 33% chance of winning that week. And that stat just blows my mind. It is.
And the other kicker had the one that missed 2 extra points had clawed back 9 other points. So it was only negative 41 from the kicker. But the other one, nothing redeeming, minus 75.
It was so great. It is. It is one of the finest things. You can tell your friends all about how you're being tortured in this league, like you're in the movie Saw. Like, it is so perfect, and you just have to. I can tell you from experiences, we've done this for a couple of years now, the draft is unlike anything else too, because you may think you've seen a run on kickers before, but never like the Norse Code League.
It's wild. I think like Justin Tucker in one of the 2 leagues went like in the 4th round or something.
Yep.
Like that.
It was brilliant. So again, if you're interested, go on and do that. Before we start, just want to give a quick shout out to Matthew, who ended up sending us some money over on PayPal. Thank you, Matthew, so much. Really do appreciate it. If you are interested in sending money to the show to help keep the lights on, help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, to help with studio space, or with Arif's laptop, or any Arif's laptop hasn't gone rogue like Dusty's did, but we're still in the process of looking at replacing it. So if you're interested in helping out the show, you can do so at patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well to give a one-time donation. So, all of that aside, all the shilling, all the fantasy football league fantasticness, the big news of the week is that Rick Spielman was given an extension.
Yeah, and it sounds like I'm pretty confident. I shouldn't even say sounds like. It syncs with Mike Zimmer's contract again. So the last time there was an extension for the 2 of them, they found a way to sync it so that they would be kind of paired together, and now paired again. I don't think it's a surprise that I am in favor of this sort of move, aside from like continuity and stuff like that, and the fact that they've built up a really strong front office. I think that by and large, Spielman's done a really good job. The problem, I think, is, and we discussed this a little bit on the other podcast I'm on, The Football Machine, is that the stuff that Spielman is good at, that builds a really good roster, is stuff that is not as clear to see, like the way that he manipulates the board, for example. I think he's one of the best general managers in the league at that. An occasional mistake here or there in terms of that, like he missed the run on kickers this last year. He missed the run on guards. Or not kickers, on kick returners. He missed the run on guards the year they drafted Brian O'Neill, which, that turned out to be fine anyway. And, just a couple of missteps here or there in terms of just playing the board. But for the most part has done a really astounding job of that. I think coming away with 15 picks this year is like anybody can make 15 picks. I don't know that there's a ton of GMs out there that can produce 15 picks unless they give up a ton of value. But the Vikings mostly won their trades. So I think that's really great. And, obviously, hitting on your third, fourth, fifth round picks, if he does that better than other GMs, and it seems like he does, that's great, but you really need to nail your first and second round picks. I think that for the most part, he's done a decent job. We'll see kind of how Mike Hughes does in a big year this year. But I think people will remember the misses, especially quarterbacks. I don't really want to judge him too harshly for what happened with Teddy. I actually don't want to judge him too harshly for Christian Ponder because I really do believe a lot of that was on Leslie Frazier. And then the rest of it is just like, well, they haven't done a lot with the offensive line. And for the most part, I think his offensive line decisions have largely been defensible. That is an area of weakness, but I think that finding way to generate the kind of value that they have. I mean, last year the Vikings had, the best receiver duo in the league, and that was a fifth round pick and an undrafted free agent. I think he's good. And the fact that the Vikings have like the fifth best win percentage over the past 5 years, a lot of that obviously has to do with Zimmer, but I think a lot of it has to do with Spielman. I think, Teddy goes down trading for Sam Bradford. I was against that move. And at least for 1 year that panned out pretty well. And the fact that Case Keenum panned out pretty well, I think that's pretty astounding. So largely, I think a really good move. Obviously, Spielman has his weaknesses, but I don't know that there's a ton of easy ways to kind of upgrade from Spielman unless you do it internally. And if they had decided to move on from Spielman and promote George Payton, I would totally understand. But I still think that kind of uncertainty is not necessarily worth the risk.
So this does basically tie Zimmer and Spielman at the hip, and despite the fact that Spielman has had other coaches, Zimmer being a long-term coach and Spielman being a long-term GM really does end up fitting into that mold that the Wilfs were talking about before, about wanting to have like a Philadelphia or not Philadelphia, a Pittsburgh style coaching tree of, this is the coach, this is the GM, and they've been here for a really long time and they are established.
Yeah. And I think, like we've talked about this a couple of times, that desire for continuity, which I think the Wilfs even brought up when this was announced, that desire for continuity, I think can be detrimental, but I think here is not. I think that continuity is good and it can be pretty overrated. I think that the fact that Pittsburgh's only had, was it 5 coaches over its life as a team, a lot of that just has to do with the fact that when they pick a coach the first time, it works out. Like, Mike Tomlin was immediately a good decision. Like they went like 15-1 or something like that. Like it wasn't difficult to figure out that Mike Tomlin was a good hire. So it was pretty easy to just kind of stick with him. But, through the lean years with Tomlin, they decided to stick with him. And I think that means a lot too. And so it allows coaches to kind of get better on the job in a way that, if you constantly cycle through coaches, you're not going to do, or if you constantly cycle through retreads instead of hiring new coaches, well, I mean, those guys are generally have been fired for a reason. Obviously, retreads can work. Belichick is technically, he's a retread after his time in Cleveland, and I wouldn't count his time with the Jets because that didn't really happen. Pete Carroll's a retread. He's been with 2 other teams before he was with the Seahawks. So like retreads aren't necessarily bad, but for the most part, there's a reason that they weren't coaching anymore. And so allowing a coach to learn on the job and improve on their process, that has a ton of value. And having a front office that, immediately, they all speak the same language and they've got, great interoperability with the coaching staff, that's difficult to build. And so there's a lot of value in that continuity. It is easy to overrate and it can be detrimental, but here I think the Wilfs are making the right move in favor of continuity and in terms of keeping, the talent that they have.
You could also argue that the continuity thing, as it's become in Pittsburgh, slowly but surely people are starting to lose their faith in Tomlin. Like you could make the argument that you probably could have moved on from him over the past year or two, but like that's when the continuity stuff really starts to be like, yeah,
for sure,
yeah. But we're not nearly at that point yet, and the team is still reasonably successful. I'll go with reasonably. So Spielman is signed. Spielman is on the contract for another couple of years. And speaking of Spielman, the GM was a part of the attempted deal for PJ Hall. who. What was your favorite, just to quote the Daily Norseman here, what was your favorite PJ Hall moment with the Minnesota Vikings? Because that was the trade that didn't happen.
I guess my favorite moment was writing up 3 paragraphs on this dude. I really enjoyed that part.
And then he fails a physical and goes right back to the Raiders, where I would expect him to be cut here shortly if he hasn't already been. That's rough. Yeah, it was an interesting trade. It was intended to help with the defense, and then was it that he just came in completely out of shape, or was there anything else that came of the physical?
We don't know why exactly he failed the physical, and teams generally don't disclose why. But the fact that he had shown up overweight to 2 consecutive Raiders camps, despite the fact that he'd spent all offseason his rookie year, trimming down and getting ready for the combine and the pro day, and absolutely killing his pro day. Despite that, found a way to show up to Raiders camp overweight within the span of a couple of months between April and August. And then the next year showed up overweight again, and had conditioning issues. And last year, the first half of the season, he actually played pretty well. And then the second half of the season, he fell off really dramatically. And you can see that even just in his production numbers. Things like pressure rate and stop rate, the second half of the season, it just wasn't there. And so it wouldn't be, wild to suggest that it is likely that those same problems plagued him when he took a physical with the Vikings. And that's like really disappointing, from the perspective of the Vikings. But at the same time, it's a guy that was going to get cut. They decided to trade a conditional 7th-round pick. He needed to be on the roster for a couple of games. I think the rumor is 6 for that 7th-round pick to kick in anyway. So it's not as if the Vikings were that invested in this decision. But, it kind of sucks because it was a guy I was interested in and I wrote enough about that I had an investment in it. But yeah, them's the breaks. He's obviously not like a super value prospect or anything like that.
And this is also the week of interesting kind of reporting as far as the defense is concerned, because the big trade of this year so far for the Vikings toward Minnesota involves a player that is now opted out.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. The biggest move that they made was to sign a player that opted out. Yeah, rough offseason in that regard. Although I guess now Michael Pierce's contract entirely tolls over. So instead of having to absorb a cap hit for nothing, they get to roll that over. But yeah, really bizarre offseason for everybody. But I guess in particular for the Vikings, who have made a couple of moves and in those couple of moves they've evaporated, right? Because the entire contract goes over for Michael Pierce. The trade gets reversed. It's like, okay, yeah, that definitely happened.
So besides this turning into like the game of Zelda where you like break the pot and it just dissolves into the sand, like, is there something that we can glean from any of this other than life is fleeting and don't try to trade with the Raiders?
Well, there's a rumor right now. Tom Pelissero says that the Vikings are going to sign Quentin Poling, and he was very recently on the Raiders. So I'm like kind of curious about that. Linebacker Quentin Poling, linebacker from Ohio, not Ohio State. So Bobcat great, Quentin Poling, initially 7th-round pick for the Miami Dolphins. Didn't make the roster there, and that was a really bad linebacker core for the Dolphins. They were like trotting out the corpse of Carlos Dansby, and he still couldn't make the team. Makes the practice squad of the Raiders, doesn't make the team for the Raiders. And I think the Raiders, they weren't rolling with like Miles Burris, but they didn't have like an extraordinary linebacker group outside of Khalil Mack, who at that time I think had already shifted completely to edge. So I don't really know why the Vikings are interested in that or who they're going to get rid of. Maybe it's a Ben Gideon thing, the fact that he opened the roster up on PUP. But yeah, they've got another former Raider coming in. But yeah, the lesson here is that you can't count on anything in life, and hope is a lie.
Well, as long as we're being uplifting to our listeners, I think hope is a lie should be the new sign off here. So before we get too deep into a couple of things, just wanted to make mention that the COVID opt out list is now closed. It's Thursday evening. the closure was on Thursday. How exactly, you had mentioned before the salary appears to like just cop over, but how exactly does it work for people who were opting out as far as the salary, as far as their salary, and how it affects like the team themselves?
Yeah, so there's two categories of opt-out. There's the high-risk opt-out, which has to be confirmed, but there's like a list of high-risk conditions, which includes some flexibility in it. Like they've got a list of everything that it can be, and then they've got a list of like, oh, and if you've just got like some respiratory disease that we haven't listed on this list, that'll count too. So that's the high risk group. For that, they get $350,000 for that year, and then their contract just tolls over. So if they signed a 1-year contract, now they're under a contract for the 2021 season with all of the terms in that contract, except for money that's, I think, already been paid out in the form of like bonuses. That gets put over to the 2021 season. So if you signed a 3-year deal, so like Michael Pierce, and aside from signing bonus, if there was a reporting bonus or a workout bonus of like $100,000, and he had showed up to work out, which I guess he technically couldn't have this year, and earned the $100,000, so they credited for the $100,000, that would still be on the books, but and he would still have the $100,000 in that hypothetical scenario, but he gets the $350,000 and he doesn't have to pay the league back or anything like that. That's just his to keep. Now, if you're in the other category, if you're choosing to opt out without a high risk condition, and I think they've expanded the definition of high risk to include if you've got family members who are high risk. But without that, if you're not a high risk opt out, there's a $150,000, I guess, stipend that you borrow against your future salary. So your contract tolls over to 2021. You get the $150,000. You have to pay that back somehow. So if, for example, you signed a 1-year deal and you were on the roster bubble, and you take the opt out and you get $150,000, and next year you don't make the team, and so all you make is like the reporting bonus or training camp stipend or whatever it is. Then you're going to have to find a way to pay the league back for the $150,000 that you essentially borrowed. Otherwise, it just gets taken out of your salary if you do end up making the team. And I assume it gets taken out in the same way that your salary gets paid to you, probably over the course of those 17 game weeks. So that is kind of a different decision, and it makes it a little bit more difficult. And it also it prevents, in theory, players who are going to get cut from opting out to kind of cash in a quick payday or whatever it is. So there's that too. But that's kind of how it works on the player side. Yeah.
So what about the team aspect of that, as far as like salary cap hit and all that? Yeah.
So they just shift the contract over 1 year, and the accounting shifts over as well. So Michael Pierce has a signing bonus over the course of his 3-year contract. That signing bonus gets paid to him in cash immediately, or in theory immediately. There's other ways to do it, like teams will put a signing bonus in escrow and stuff like that. But for the purposes of this discussion, it gets paid in cash immediately. But the way it's worked out in the salary cap for the past several CBAs is that the penalty against the cap gets split out either over the lifetime of the contract or over the next 5 years, whichever is shorter. And so Michael Pierce, 3-year deal, whatever a signing bonus is, it gets split essentially into 3-year chunks, into 3. And that penalty that is applied to whatever the base salary is plus whatever bonuses are that year. So I don't have his contract numbers in front of me, but let's say he signed a 3-year, $21 million deal. That would be $7 million a year. That's nice and easy math. And that signing bonus was $12 million or something, which is pretty high for a $21 million a year. But that gets split into 3 for cap accounting purposes. And so the penalty against the cap is $4 million for the signing bonus that gets split into 3, plus the $7 million base salary. So he would have a $7 million cap charge this year. all of that gets moved into 2021, whereas the 2021 stuff gets moved into 2022. And then 2022, that gets moved into 2023. And so now he's under contract for an additional year. Now, if any of that base salary was part of that was actually a workout bonus, so he had a $500,000 workout bonus and he had already achieved it, then he would receive the $500,000, and then that $500,000 would count against the cap. And my understanding is that most of these opt-outs don't have that. Like things like roster bonuses only kick in, usually either the third day of the league year, which case, if that's a new deal, that's when it kicks in, but that's usually not true for new deals, or upon making the 53-man. And so that would get kind of ported over into the next year. So for the most part, the entire contract shifts over, whereas before there was some, I wouldn't say confusion. There was initially reporting that the signing bonus stuff would still apply. That has changed. And in the final deal that was actually struck with the NFLPA and the NFL, the signing bonus accounting also moves over a year. So it's very clean, whereas before it was kind of messy, whereas the signing bonus stuff stayed. And so in theory, the Vikings would be, in that fake example, the Vikings would still have that $4 million cap charge, or in real life, $2 million, because his signing bonus was $6 million. There was some discussion that the $2 million would be counted against the cap. And then before, there was also discussion that the $350,000 would be counted against the cap. I don't think that's the case either. So the Vikings essentially have Michael Pierce in reserve.
I want to thank you for explaining that, because it feels like the rules to this have been kind of up in the air and negotiated as this has gone on. And it seemed like every other day there was like a newer version of the information as more players were coming out and saying they weren't going to be playing or anything. So thank you for explaining that to someone who honestly tried to figure this out.
Yeah, well, it has been changing. So that it's tough to keep up to date on it all.
Just like everything else, it seems like every day or every other day, whatever your standard is not what you're actually doing anymore. So just wanted to double check how exactly that was going. So there's a couple of notes over the past week. A couple people of note ended up going into the COVID list and then were put back into like their natural habitat. Like Anthony Barr went on the COVID list initially and ended up going off pretty quickly. But so besides the COVID list, what has been has there been any like real information as to how the not training camp is going?
Only in the pressers that we've been having with like the coaches and stuff. And so in walkthroughs, apparently, according to offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak, the Vikings have rolled out their 4 starters that they've kept from last year as the starting offensive linemen, and then which presupposes that Elflein is going to start, which is a problem. And then for the open spot where Josh Klein was at right guard, in theory at right guard, it could, they might be moving Elflein to right guard and it could be at left guard, but there's a competition between Ezra Cleveland, Dakota Dozier, and Aviante Collins, which also indicates that Drew Samia was not in a position to take over a roster spot, as a lot of people, including me, had previously assumed. And that I'm actually okay with, because what I saw Week 17 Chicago was not great. So from Drew Samia. So that seems to be like the information we're getting. We're not getting a ton in terms of like, is Justin Jefferson already running with the ones? I assume he is. What's happening with the tight ends? How often are we seeing 2 tight end sets? Is Herb Smith taking like significant, tight end 1 snaps? We're not getting information along those lines. It's really just the stuff that the coaches are telling us. And we've most recently had Gary Kubiak on the call. So that's kind of what we have. Otherwise, it's just they're doing strength and conditioning work, and then they're also doing walkthroughs, which is all the CBA allows for the first portion of training camp after people report in, is strength and conditioning work. And then I think for walkthroughs, like coaches may not even be allowed on the field. I'm not really sure how that works, but those rules have also been changing about kind of what they can do at training camp and when. So yeah, not a ton of news. The only real news to react to is this offensive line stuff, which frankly, a lot of us, including me, don't love for the Vikings. I think that having Pat Elflein out there commits yourself to that liability. The Vikings may have already committed themselves to that liability anyway, just because they got rid of the good guard, and so they had 2 holes at guard, and they were only able to fill one of them through the draft. So it was kind of inevitable that you'd end up with a suboptimal solution at one of the guard spots, unless Drew Samia kind of rose above the challenge and was actually a fairly good guard, in which case you'd have an additional guard. And I think the second thing is, so aside from Pat Elflein being confirmed to be the assumed starter, not necessarily having won the job or anything like that. Aside from that, the other one is that they haven't really tried Ezra Cleveland out at tackle, and they haven't tried Riley Reif out at guard. So it's going the other way that a lot of us kind of assumed or had argued for, which was that Reif would be moving to guard and that Cleveland would play tackle. The thing that concerns me is not necessarily that Cleveland is not a fit at guard, although that absolutely does concern me. I think Reif is just a way better guard for his skill set. I think Cleveland is a way better tackle for his skill set, just relatively speaking. And even though he would probably be a worse tackle out of the gate, just because he's a second-round rookie, a worse tackle out of the gate than Riley Reif, and also a worse guard out of the gate. And then in theory, if that's the case, you'd kind of want him at guard because that's a less alarming position to be a liability at. I would still say you want Reif at guard just because the drop-off, I think, is much bigger, just because if Cleveland's not a fit to play offensive line immediately, but he's in particular not a fit to play guard, you open up a huge liability or a huge hole there. But the second concern I have is if it's a right guard position that they're essentially auditioning for, I'm worried about adapting to playing on the right side and not really setting Cleveland up to play left tackle well right away, because sometimes it can be really difficult for offensive linemen to switch their footwork when they move from right tackle to left tackle, right guard to left guard. And if you ask offensive linemen, and I've asked a couple, and Jeff Schwartz has said this, I think Joe Thomas may have also said this on Twitter, is a lot of teams, not every team, and Paul Alexander, the offensive line coach, that's been on Twitter, and I talked to him a lot. A lot of teams will prefer, if like a tackle goes down, to flex their guard out to tackle and then replace that guard with whoever they've got on the roster, rather than replace the tackle because of the same-sided footwork. They don't want to move your right tackle to left tackle or anything like that very often, which was kind of how people had originally done it, because that was kind of the order of how skilled your players were. Like your right tackle was your second most skilled offensive lineman, generally speaking. So then you'd move them to the left tackle because that's the more important spot. That's not really how it is anymore. They want to preserve the footwork because it's really difficult to change that right away. And we've seen this happen a couple of times when Tyron Smith and Doug Free switched sides in Dallas, and Doug Free then subsequently became like the highest paid right tackle in the league. They both initially had some growing pains before Tyron Smith locked down and established himself as like kind of an elite left tackle. And an offensive lineman will say it's actually more difficult to switch sides than it is to switch positions from guard to tackle or tackle to guard because of that. And so my worry is just that I would rather, Cleveland just learn the one thing instead of not only give him a new position, but then also new footwork. And obviously, Brian O'Neill, he played left tackle at Pitt, and he's playing right tackle with the Vikings. It's not as if it's like this impossible task. And I just gave an example of an elite player switching from right tackle to left tackle and becoming elite, right? So it's not as if it's impossible, but I'd like to reduce the total amount of risk involved overall. And honestly, if Elflein is going to be a liability literally anywhere he lines up, then put him at right guard. I don't care about him switching his footwork. It doesn't matter. Put him at right guard and then put Cleveland at left guard so that he can learn left-sided footwork in the Vikings system. And maybe that's what's happening. Again, it would be nice to be at camp to know these things, but we don't. But the offensive line situation is really the only one that we've got a ton of updates on.
everything else is just kind of slowly trickling in. Like, well, we heard that X player was kind of was practicing with X player, but otherwise it's just so the offensive line looks like it might be better, might be worse, pointing toward worse.
It might be worse. I don't know. Like if you replace Josh Klein with a rookie, there's and Klein was pretty good. He's the best performing interior offensive lineman they had last year. There's a chance it just falls off, right? Like if we, bake in an assumption that Brian O'Neill gets slightly better and works his way into the top 5 right tackle conversation, great. If we work in or bake in the idea that Garrett Bradbury gets better, and I think there's more reason to believe he'll get better than get worse, great. Those lead to improvements, but I think a drop off at right guard for whatever reason, that's a concern. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if the offensive line just kind of stayed where they were, like ranked 20 to 25th in the league for, however you want to rank offensive line. I mean, that's kind of where I would have put the 2019 Vikings. And I think the 2020 Vikings are kind of on that same track. And I think they had an opportunity to push themselves up a little bit further by making, slightly better decisions there.
So here's my question to you. I had read something on Twitter a couple of days ago that was an article, and it had said something along the lines of, this year the Vikings have a chance for their offense to be better than their defense finally. Do you think there's any potential to that, or is that just a little bit too far, a little bit too far to like really acknowledge?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary of the kind of strange situation the Vikings are in. Actually, the beat brought it up to Mike Zimmer on Monday. Like, hey, is it possible that the offense is better than the defense for like the first time in a long time? And Zimmer was like, a lot of people say this defense is going to get worse. I'll say we'll see. But I think there's certainly that possibility because this defensive line looks a lot worse than it did last year because you lose a starting nose tackle. Now you don't get to replace him. You lose your starting edge rusher. You've replacing him with someone who was a backup last year. That when Everson Griffin replaced Jared Allen, I think everybody kind of understood that Everson was very likely to just kind of pick up where Allen left off and probably play better than Allen's final year with the Vikings. The year before that, obviously, Allen set a record, so like not play better, but play better than Allen's final year. So you've got a really good chance of an upgrade because Everson was so productive in his limited snaps at pressure production and sack production, and he got a $9 million contract, which at the time was really high, and so there was a huge expectation that he would just kind of fill in and play even better, possibly. And obviously he met those expectations and even exceeded them in some capacity. So that I don't think is the expectation for Afadi. I'm a huge kind of Odenigbo guy. I think that, he's really got a lot of potential to become a pretty good starting quality edge rusher. But, you compare Odenigbo's potential to what Everson Griffin's potential was when he finally assumed the starting role. It's not the same. So you're probably getting a downgrade there. You still haven't fixed the 3 technique position. So you're going backwards on the defensive line. You're going backwards at cornerback probably, and mostly just because we have no idea what's going to happen there. Mike Hughes, his most memorable moment as a Viking so far is to get posterized by Amari Cooper, allowed 154 yards and 17 targets in that Dallas game. I like Hughes. I think he's more than that game, but there's just a lot of uncertainty there. You've got a rookie. Rookies routinely play poorly unless they're like Tre'Davious White, who, after hemming and hawing, decided not to opt out. That was kind of the most interesting opt-out decision as the deadline was approaching. And then you've got Holton Hill, who's only played 324, I think, coverage snaps. And he played pretty well in them, but it's like not a huge enough sample for us to say anything. So good chance that drops off. Kendricks is coming off of a career year, so there's a decent chance of regression there just by natural variance. He could still be kind of the same guy and just not play as well because that's how, human performance works. Harrison Smith is 30 or something, and he could drop off. He felt like he dropped off a little bit last year. So there's all kinds of opportunities for this defense to play worse, whereas the offense largely remains the same aside from the most spectacular piece, Diggs. And with Thielen returning, it really feels like you might be able to replace some of that and you've got this first round replacement, and and whatnot. I think that there's a lot more certainty. You've got one player that you're essentially replacing on offense, and I know that the offensive line you're replacing Josh Klein with that is Cleveland, but I think for the most part, if Cleveland plays at a Josh Klein level, that's not my expectation, but it also wouldn't be like a huge surprise, right? So that's fine. But it's you're just replacing Stephon Diggs with Justin Jefferson in a manner of speaking. But on the defensive side of the ball, you're replacing Everson Griffin, you're replacing Linval Joseph, you're replacing all three starting corners, and in some of the situations, you're replacing them with players that it's not ideal to replace them with. So there's going to be a bigger defensive drop-off, probably, than offensive drop-off, probably, and the offense, the quarterback is the same, and that's the driver of offenses. Like, I know that, Kirk Cousins doesn't inspire tons of confidence in a ton of people, but he played pretty well last year. And so you've still got that. And so there's going to be this baseline of how well the offense is going to do. And if the offense drops from, I don't know what it was, like 8th, I have no idea what the offense was. But if it drops off like 2 spots, that would make sense. If it drops off 4 spots, that would make sense. The defense, which is like 6th in points allowed, could drop off like 8 spots. And you'd just be like, yeah, that makes sense. I understand that. So I think it is possible that the offense is better than the defense for the first time in a very, very long time.
All right, that's going to cover most of the training camp stuff. As we get closer to the actual kickoff, we will have more real training camp stuff of the things we're allowed to see through ESPN, NFL Network, and covering and press conferences that are covered via Zoom. So we'll provide all the information that we can to you when we are allowed to have it. In the meantime, if you are a Patreon subscriber, now is where you will hear the Patreon mailbag. If you are not a Patreon subscriber, you will be greeted with my lovely voice here in just a second with bringing you into the real mailbag. All right, let's go into the regular mailbag, and we're going to start with Vikings Wales, who asks, is one possible explanation for Cleveland being tried out at right guard that they see Brian O'Neill as the long-term left tackle and want to use right guard as a bridge to right tackle for Cleveland?
Daddy's that's like too many extra steps. Just make him the left tackle then, and then move Riley Reif to guard, and now Cleveland's your right tackle. Like, don't screw around. You can just do it. And at the same time, you've improved the guard position by putting Riley Reif there. So I guess that could be it. And, if the Vikings ended up doing it, props to you for pointing this out. But I would say that is pretty inefficient.
Convoluted at best. Joe Justice asks the question, is the recent trade / failed physical proof that the Vikings do not have a time traveler in their front office?
I think we've had a lot of proof that they don't have a time traveler in their front office.
This whole situation just reeks of not having a time traveler in your front office and the damage that it can bring.
Wow, big oversight. Honestly, I'm going to take back what I said about extending Rick Spielman. The fact that he hasn't brought in a time traveler into that front office, glaring weakness.
This is a problem. This is a problem that needs to be addressed. Eric Dunn asks, what is your best guess on what the Vikings will do with the extra cap space they gained from Pierce opting out, if they choose to use it at all?
I don't think they're going to use it at all. I don't know, roll over into next year. That's probably their use.
Yeah. Mike Ellis asks, assume for a minute the season is canceled. What should the Vikings do, given that players will be older and most likely next year's salary cap will be substantially lower due to lower revenues?
Honestly, I thought that was going to finish with "will be older and most likely wiser," and I was like, "Wow, okay, yeah, you're right. Players are not going to want to hang out with this."
No.
No. Okay. So players are older. The salary cap has decreased. Although I think they're working out a deal that the decrease is going to be prorated out over 3 years, and who knows? But in that scenario, I don't know that it's going to be any different than any other team. I mean, the Vikings aren't an especially old team. I mean, they're not an especially young team anymore, like they were like 2015, 2016. But they're not an especially old team, right? Like you have to deal with like, Harrison Smith and I guess at this point, Adam Thielen. But for the most part, it's like not that big a deal. I don't think you have that many players now that Everson, Griffin, and Linval Joseph are gone. I think you have that many players where you're worried about kind of an age cliff catching up to them, where the deal that they signed is just no longer going to be good. So it's probably not a huge problem, and that's maybe where all this extra cap rollover space might help out. If they roll over into next year, they can approximate a pretty similar cap. I wouldn't be shocked if the cap just drops precipitously. Like if there's like a 30% drop in the cap and for whatever reason the NFL and the NFLPA cannot agree to some kind of adjustment, they might instead agree to just slashing everybody's salary by a certain percentage, in which case that kind of just resolves itself and you don't have to worry about manipulating cap space in order to accommodate the players that you have on the roster. So honestly, I don't really think that there's that much that the Vikings specifically would have to do versus, say, another team. I don't know that there's a ton of players where you're that concerned that other year is going to be brutal. Like they might cut Kyle Rudolph. They might attempt to renegotiate a salary with Harrison Smith, although I don't think that they're there yet. And you wouldn't want to renegotiate Adam Thielen's salary anyway. It's kind of already a steal. So, yeah, I mean, and Cousins, like they already have priced in the fact that he's going to be whatever age he's going to be, and that's going to be fine anyway. I guess you'd have to worry about Riley Reif, but they've already kind of made a move that makes it kind of easy to cut Reif next year. So yeah, everything's already kind of going according to plan anyway.
Herky Alert has our favorite question of the episode. My wife is going to give birth to a boy in mere hours. What Vikings players should we name it after?
Why are you asking a podcast to name your child? What is happening? You can't let that happen. Hopefully she listens to the podcast, not to our suggestions. Okay, so James's initial, so he replied, and he said, well, if this is time sensitive, Arif's answer is going to be Alan Page. Your answer was going to be what? Jared Allen, Chris Carter, and someone else?
CJ Ham.
Okay, well, don't do that.
He's the best fullback in the league. Let's.
Actually, the best fullback is Kyle Juszczyk, which would be a hell of a name to burden a child with as a first name. This is Juszczyk Peterson. Yeah, the name's Polish. He's not. But aside from Allen or Alan Page, which Allen doesn't seem like it's a name that's super in vogue anymore, right? Like not a ton of people are naming kids Allen anymore. I don't know why not. It's not a bad name. But I guess aside from that, or like clearly joke names that would be like a full, your whole first name is Waswaswanga, like that one name would be pretty interesting, but probably don't do that. Someone suggested Randy. That's just like a good name, right? Like obviously I hold Alan Page in the highest regard. And so Randy Moss is like a tier 2 Vikings player. Like almost everyone who's not Alan Page is. And so that's not the first name that comes to mind, but it's just like a good name, right? So you could do Randy. I suspect there's like a fair number of Randys running around in Minnesota. So keep that in mind. I don't know. This just seems like not a question we should be handling.
You know, it really depends if you want your son to be really good at football, because I really think that.
Oh, how about Winfield? Actually, no, I like this as a first name, Winfield.
Winfield, okay, I could see that. But if you really want your son to be good at football, you should probably name them Chad.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Chad's really great at football.
Yep.
Universally acclaimed to be good at football.
Great at football. Nothing but a greenway in front of you there. Alex asks, how do you honestly feel about the number of COVID cases across the NFL? Is the number acceptable, and should we be confident, or is this something to be nervous about? I have tried my best not to be overly negative lately about the whole COVID thing and try not to be as sarcastic and like down as possible. So I am the wrong person to ask. Arif, what do you think?
So the NFLPA released essentially anonymized results that 56 players have, since training camps have begun, have tested positive. So that's, they say it's 2% of the player body. I think it's only 2% if you also include the 59 who also tested positive, which brings it up to like 107, that is 2%. So if you also include the 59 that have tested positive during the off season, that's 107. So that's a 4% rate. And while the 2% rate is more important because it is the number of people who have been in like regular contact with other members of the NFL staff and NFL players, I think a lot of people are kind of just reporting the 2% rate instead of the 4% rate without distinguishing between them. But it does mean that the rate of infection within NFL facilities, if there's any infection at all in NFL facilities, and it seems like there really hasn't been, or as far as I can tell, the contact tracing has not revealed that this is happening. Most of the people who have tested positive seem to have tested positive either because of false positives. There's a couple of those. I think Matt Stafford's one example. Or have contracted it outside of the NFL environment. So the transmission within NFL facilities thus far seems to be really low. And that's obviously, I think, really fantastic news. The fact that 4% of NFL players have at one point tested positive, and again, positive test doesn't mean you have it, but around 4% have probably contracted it. I don't love that number. That's not a pessimistic number. I think a pessimistic number is above 5 to 7%. So it's not there, but it's not like the best number. I mean, aside from like the pie in the sky zero number. So there's that, but 2% since players have started interacting with each other, I think that's great. I don't know if I'm optimistic yet. I think that number is optimistic. I don't know if I'm optimistic about how things are going forward, especially once contact actually starts, because it's easy to socially distance right now when all players can do is like strength training and a little bit of light walkthroughs outside. When they begin contact, which begins like 2 weeks from now, that's when you really have to pay attention. And if the NFL, just like, a couple of leagues have had, like the NBA, for example, has had a ton of days in a row without a positive test, right? If the NFL, by the time we get to that part of training camp, has significantly diminished, or that hasn't even had positive tests for a while, then fantastic. By the time contact starts, very low likelihood of transmission. They're probably not going to handle it like baseball has handled it, and that's good news. So that's great, but my worry meter is still going to be kind of ticking until we get to that point, or until we get to the point where positivity is just so low that practices with contact just kind of don't matter with regards to transmissibility. The second thing to pay attention to is also, now that it's below 5%, we have to acknowledge that at one point the plans that the NFL put in place, or the requirements that NFL put on NFL teams, might change at some point pretty soon from every day to every other day. And if that's the case, you have to continue to pay attention. And if it's really low, doesn't matter. But if it starts creeping up, if it gets to 4%, 5%, since people have gotten in contact with each other, then you have to worry about whether or not they should switch to every other day type testing. The number's positive. I think that's good. I think it's weird that everybody framed it the same way. I kind of wanted to hear the number and then kind of come to my own conclusion, and then kind of see why people were arguing for another conclusion. It makes me suspect that the NFL leaked these results to reporters before the NFLPA announced it, and the NFL was able to frame it to a lot of these reporters, and so they're like, this is all great news. But I think just generally speaking, that is probably pretty good. But I wouldn't say I'm close to a conclusion yet on whether or not the NFL is handling this well.
Next question is from Kyle Slaby, who asks, would you rather the Vikings have A, the league's best backup quarterback, B, the league's best dime defensive back, fourth cornerback or third safety, C, league's best third down only pass rusher, or D, the league's best fullback? I'm already of the belief that we have D, so really A, B, or C?
Well, so I think backup quarterback is just out of the question. If it was like Sam Bradford was the quarterback, I would probably pick that one, but it's Kirk Cousins who's like not missed a game due to injury. I guess knock on wood, sorry. But your dime defensive back is going to play way more, right? Because I mean, the Vikings, how many times have they dipped into their I guess their sixth defensive back, which has been Mike Hughes, has been Jaron Kearse, has been Holton Hill. They've all seen playing time this year, right? Andrew Sandeo had to play in the slot, right? Which is wild. That's absolutely more important, I think, for the Vikings than backup quarterback. But I think third down pass rush is more important than either. Even though those defensive backs have greater positional value, your third down pass rusher has an immediate effect on the game, regardless of injury. So if you've got the best third down pass rusher, and for whatever reason, like they can only rush on third down, and like we'll assume that it's not like you've got Von Miller on third down and they're just contractually obligated to only rush on third down. Like we'll assume it's like Fadio Denabo, like only shows up on third down because like they're not good enough to beat out your starters, not because they have this weird magical restriction or anything like that. I think you're in a good spot because you can get 6-7 sacks out of that guy, maybe even 8 or 9 in a lucky year, and that's pretty good. Third down matters a lot, and if you can shut down third down, I mean, what the 2017 and 2018 Vikings were first in third down conversion rate defensively, and they ranked like number 1 and number 3 in points allowed. Like, I don't think that's a mistake. So, I would take the third down pass rusher.
Yeah. Duke's Code asks, under the run blocking theory of value, a rushing offense is only as valuable as the total sum of offensively necessary labor needed to produce those runs. Are running backs, outnumbered 5-1 by O-linemen, mind you, stealing cap dollars from their fellow starters by doing less work?
Well, first of all, the only reason it's stealing is because there's a salary cap. So really, they're stealing money from, or really, it's the salary cap that's taking money out of offensive linemen's pockets. So never blame one person when you can blame a whole system, I think. But
yeah, that'll never get anyone in trouble, really.
But second, I would argue that cap dollars are misallocated with this in mind, but I've argued that in the past, so that's like not interesting. I don't blame the running backs, and I don't think offensive linemen should be mad at running backs either. It's you always got to point to the exec who's making the decisions. So the executives and the owners who organize the CBA. So I would argue that the cap dollars are misallocated with that in mind. I don't know that I would characterize any running back as stealing.
You still don't believe in paying them, but you don't believe they're stealing either.
Yeah, no, I don't think that if you're in a position to determine whether or not you should pay them, that you should pay them. But I also think that they should, like, if you're willing to make a mistake, they should be willing to exploit it. Like, go you. Yeah. Take all the money. Good job, Todd Gurley.
Tommy Gunn asks, the wife never seems to remember that we have open containers of sour cream in our fridge and continually buys a new one each time the recipe calls for it.
Pause real quick. I thought this question was going to go, the wife never seems to remember that we have an open relationship. And I was like, this is not the case for that. And I hope you have a good lawyer. But okay, open containers of sour cream, totally different. Got it.
Let's try the way that it's written and see if we get.
I have to keep reminding her we're in an open relationship, and so none of this other stuff that I'm doing matters.
And why is there so much goddamn sour cream in the fridge all the time?
Well, I keep bringing people home, and they keep on bringing sour cream. I got to remind her, we have an open door policy on this relationship.
Well, open fridge, really. So Tommy Gunn asks, the wife never seems to remember that we have open containers of sour cream.
Yep.
Normally I can muscle through these, and you're the one who's cracking up, so I'm really trying right now. The wife never seems to remember that we have open containers of sour cream in our fridge and continually buys new ones each time a recipe calls for it. Do I continue to remind her, or passive aggressively do what she does with beer instead?
Do I continue to remind her passive aggressively? Or like how is this phrased? Because the beer thing is super passive aggressive, but like my impression was that it is. No, it is phrased that way. Yeah, so the beer thing is super passive aggressive, and that's funny, but also why do you have like open containers of beer? Like that's kind of weird, right?
Well, I think it's more like
well, you got like a 2 liter of beer in there that you're.
Who has a 2 liter of beer? First off, it's a 40, like, and second off, it'd be like the better analogy would be like you get the 6-pack, you drink 1 or 2, and then you go out and get another 6-pack.
Okay, and then you get a new 6-pack. Okay, I get it. Okay, I was like, what? You've got open containers of beer in the fridge that you're not finishing? What is this?
I'm sorry, we're not all bougie like you. Or I'm just gonna pour the rest of it out.
Finish our beer.
I bet you throw away your cigarettes too instead of saving the reburn and trying to be economical. In this economy, you got to save your beer in the fridge.
So the phrasing of this question implies that you do remind her on a fairly consistent basis that this is happening, which I don't know what to do about that. That's kind of weird that keeps happening. Because if I get reminded 3 times in this scenario, I would just imagine like the next time I go out to buy sour cream, I'd just be like, you know what? At some point, I would just be like,
that's the problem. There's a disconnect here, and in the part of her brain where sour cream is an important part of her existence and the ingredients list for what she's putting together, she just constantly does this. Tommy Gunn, I am sorry to say that what you're going to have to do is much like the people who go through the grocery store and check the expired dates. Just start rolling them off. Like it's not even worth it. Or get yourself if you really want to tempt fate, get yourself a container of just get yourself not a Ziploc container, but like a Rubbermaid container or whatever, and just put the ones in there and just mark it like by the month as to when they will expire.
Okay. Right, yeah. So
you're not going to win this. This sometimes happens. Tommy, you are not going to win this argument with beer. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be successful.
Well, it depends on who the judge is, right? Because Tommy, if you're the judge, you absolutely are going to win the argument with beer. But, it does not preserve the sanctity of your relationship. And you're going to have to open things up, as it were, if you continue with the beer-based strategy. This
leads to a slippery slope of doing all sorts of things even more passive aggressively. Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship where you're like passively aggressively putting away the dishes. Like, you can get to that point, and this is a slippery slope.
That's terrifying. Yeah, do not escalate into a passive aggressive war, especially in this state.
Not in this economy where you're having to save your half beers in the fridge.
So my first instinct to this question, aside from misinterpreting the direction it was going in, was to like scoop all of the non-expired sour cream up and put it all into one bowl and freeze it and then just like use it yourself. But that, they've got different expiration dates, and like apparently this is like a persistent problem. My second one was, wow, you're clearly not eating sour cream enough, because sour cream is like this amazing ingredient. But if this persistently happens, you clearly are eating sour cream enough, because like, how many times does a recipe call for sour cream and then you go out and buy, like, if you keep on having open containers of sour cream and they pile up in the fridge, that's weird. You must be eating a lot of sour cream. Third, you could try like an organizational strategy where you just keep a spot in the fridge just for sour cream, and it's like near the front. And so every time you open the fridge, you're like reminded that sour cream is there. I don't know. It feels like actually reminding. The conversation approach isn't working. Maybe visual reminders will continue to work. I don't know. But yeah, the Tupperware strategy where you just like write down the expiration date, that might be useful too. This is a really bizarre problem.
No.
When did this become a relationship podcast?
This is...
Well, I guess we give like parenting advice too, so who cares?
Yeah, we have Uncle Arif's parenting
we
corner.
Just named a kid.
Yeah, we just named a kid. We're in discussions about having a beekeeping corner. Like, it'll be Uncle Arif's beekeeping corner. It'll be fantastic. Ian Pauly asks, best non-traditional pizza style, i.e. Hawaiian, always wrong, Italian beef with giardiniera, buffalo chicken, etc.
I haven't had the Italian beef with giardiniera before. That sounds really good. I actually don't mind Hawaiian pizza. The concept of it disgusted me, and someone was like, Arif, you really like pride yourself on like trying a bunch of new stuff, so just try it and don't be a baby about it. And I ate it, and I actually kind of liked it. So that like shocked me. But I totally don't like judge people for not liking Hawaiian pizza. Like, I get it. Like, it's very bizarre. But my favorite non-traditional pizza has to be garlic mashed potato pizza, which is, it's like super carbing up, right?
Are you talking like pizza luce sort of thing?
Yeah. Which I think pizza luce used to have mashed potato, and now it's baked potato. Either way, it's really good.
They
Don from Ohio, that's how you can tell I've stopped doing keto. Mm-hmm. But man, that mashed potato pizza
it was so
incredible.
Good. It was so good. They had it when I was living down there, and I remember when my then girlfriend or fiance, whatever the timeline is, the one I proposed to after we went to Taco John's, she had a thing.
Hey, I like Taco John's. Sorry,
so. Quick side note here as Arif dies. So there was verification that story was in fact accurate, as the listener is her now fiance, so, or husband, or whichever. But yeah, so that apparently is in fact a true story. Not apparently, it is, but still funny. Let's go with that pizza is amazing. My favorite non-traditional would end up having to be, if we're doing that sort of style, would probably end up being like a taco pizza, which is how I can cheat and win this.
Taco pizza's good.
Taco pizza.
I still think garlic mashed potato pizza is just it's the best pizza.
It really is so good. Damn it. I wanted to grab just a quick question here that was going to be in the mailbag for Patreon, but was so good I wanted to move it over to the regular mailbag here instead of the Patreon one. Thomas asks, if the NFL were to be canceled and somehow replaced by game simulations, could beat writers still maintain a semblance of relevance? I was going to add sanity to that.
So this is important. One of our most successful stories, or a series of stories at The Athletic, is Aaron Gleeman running out of the park baseball and simulating a twin season and writing about that.
So good. I especially once it hit the playoffs, I was checking it daily, almost hourly, to see his new article.
Yeah, people loved it, and with good reason. It was phenomenal. some beat writers would be able to maintain their relevance. I imagine some wouldn't. And this is not a knock on the ones who could or couldn't. It's just some styles of writing require that you generate stories by talking to players about what happened, right? And so getting quotes from players, getting quotes from coaches, talking about kind of the way that their feelings or input or whatever on the game manifested in the game itself is a big part of the way that they write. And so, which I think is super valuable. And it's a lot of it is kind of the original way that a lot of sports writing is done. They would find themselves in a much more difficult position. Nerds like Gleeman, nerds like me, I think we'd figure it out. And I would probably use the fact that there's a couple of people in the Madden community that I know that I would talk to see how to talk about this in an interesting and engaging way. And I try to spice up kind of how I'm doing this by bringing them in and talking to them about it. So there's ways to do it. But I think it would probably hurt a lot of people's careers. The whole point of a podcast is that I'm arrogant enough to think that other people care about what I say. So it comes as no shock that I'm also arrogant enough to think that I would survive this transition. But I think I would do all right in this scenario. But I think a lot of people would have a lot of difficulty. Yeah.
William asks, I have adopted the extra point rule in my fantasy league as well. Oh, you poor fool. I lost a game.
It's spreading.
Oh, it has. This is not the first person I've received a message from that has said that they have started doing the negative 25 points in their league. Now, there's a few of them out there, and my favorite of the tweet replies are people who try to get like serious fantasy football people like, hey, you have to, they say you're a coward if you don't do this. Like, I really want somebody of like note to be like, I have to try this, or to interview us and be like, what on earth like were you smoking at the time that you decided that this was going to be a thing? So William says, I have adopted the extra point rule in a fantasy league as well. I lost a game this past season to someone who had, I want to say, the Jets kicker. During the course of the game, this jackass threw an interception. My question is, am I going too far by putting a automatic loss if your kicker throws an interception? No, in fact, I remember this game because I had the Jets kicker.
Okay, so I'll say this. In theory, grudge-based commissioning is awesome and hilarious. I don't know if you should institute an automatic loss, but I do think it is so funny that a kicker threw an interception, which does happen from time to time, but also the fact that it was the Jets makes it even better.
Yes.
In theory, I think that the penalties for kickers should be way more for just random stuff. But I don't think it should be an automatic loss. I think that it would be funny if it was negative 25 points for an interception. But in addition to that, if a kicker runs in a touchdown, I think you should get 30 points.
We might as well just have this be the most kicker-centric league in the history of the planet, which it might already be, but like to really amp up the kicker flavor.
What kicker is likely to run in it? Like, are we gonna bump a kicker up our kicker rankings by saying, oh, that dude ran a 4.5 at the combine? That's like a super athletic kicker.
I have half joked
he'll run in a touchdown.
I have half joked for years that we really need to focus on the kicker because this is part of our brand now. So, as far as the grudge-based commissioning that you're proposing here, I'm not saying that it should be an automatic loss. I am saying that if they throw an interception and it turns into a pick six, that has to be negative 25 points as well. Like, that hurts. That is amazing. You're not being punished enough. if you have that kicker on your team. Like, he is going back to the locker room and is going to weep quietly while listening to the Smiths. Like, he is done for the night. Like, he and Taylor Swift are going to be best buds in their earplugs, while, like, listening to Folklore and eating a large container of popcorn.
Here's a good, I think, rule, generally speaking, regarding kicker-related catastrophes in fantasy leagues. I think it should be your goal, without an automatic loss, to make the owner of the kicker feel worse than the kicker does.
Oh. We're talking passive-aggressive. No, we're not even talking passive-aggressive. We're talking actively aggressive posts in the message board section. We're talking trade, like, just bombing them with terrible trades for their players, for other kickers. Like, no, you don't understand. You don't need Drew Brees. You need this kicker because he's not going to throw a pick six next time that he plays on the next time he plays football. Like, just bombard them, make them weep, make them really, really feel the negative 50 points that end up coming out of that.
I love the idea of someone like weighing the pros and cons of like trading their wide receiver too. Like, oh man, Brandon Cooks for Justin Tucker. That's tough.
Exactly. This is, God, I missed this league so much. I've wanted to talk about it for a long time, but every year I have to wait till August to open up my present, and here it is. Don from Ohio asks, how do we listeners know our Patreon money is actually going towards the Norse Code podcast and not towards your lavish lifestyles? Now, to be fair, the other day when I was talking to Arif, I said that we should donate because it looks like we're not going to be able to do a show, to do a live show this year. I had suggested that we donate our money to charity.
Did you?
It was Aaron Rodgers' family. But
oh, okay. Real funny.
just throwing that out there.
I was like, wait, I don't remember this at all because I just barreled in with "Give me the money."
Also, would you
like, man, do I gotta feel bad?
No. Also, there's a link below. Would you eat this, and what would you do, or would you do anything different to it? So we click on the link, and it appears to be a chicken cutlet that is deep fried, and then is that Alfredo?
That's fettuccine Alfredo.
It was either fettuccine Alfredo or stroganoff, like as like noodles in there. And I hate to say that Kyle Segal has figured out exactly what it needs. It just needs some tomato, in my opinion.
Yeah, actually, yeah. He nailed it, which pretty rare for us to say that about Kyle Segal.
He had a moment of clarity. Kyle figured out exactly what the situation required.
The clouds opened up and God spoke to him.
Tomatoes, Kyle. It needs tomatoes.
But
put some
that
pants
looks good.
on.
I would eat the hell out of that. I mean, it's like it's basically schnitzel anyway, right? It's just whatever. It's chicken parmesan without the tomato. Like, we eat it already. It's just a different form factor.
Yeah.
I'd eat the hell out of that.
Maybe just a little bit of Parmesan cheese and some pepper and some tomato, and I would be quite pleased, depending on how it tasted, if it needed a little bit of garlic too, but that's
I just advocated putting mashed potatoes on a pizza. So like this, whatever.
We're already an interesting food take area now. Also, final question of the show. Dear haters of real grills and smokers, not that sentence...
You don't need to pluralize that. Clearly this is directed at James. I said I'd have an open mind about this.
What movie...
Yeah,
what movie that has been delayed so far this year would you pay $30 to watch on a streaming service, or $20?
So what movies have been delayed this year?
Well, a number of them have been delayed, but like the big one that they're talking about is Mulan being...
Yeah, because Mulan's $30, yeah.
Which is absurd. Why would you do that?
Well, so I was thinking like, wow, $30, what an awful deal. And then I was like... Well, Mulan is directed at like families, right? So like a family of 5 was already going to spend more than $30 to watch it in a theater.
Theoretically, yes.
But it is like the whole point is that it's in a theater, so like you're still losing a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Even a date night gets close to 30 if with two adults, presumably a drink or two. You're already close to 30 right now, and you throw in a bit of popcorn. You're like, okay, well now
it's just we've normalized like streaming being just kind of a flat fee.
Yeah.
So it's just like difficult for me to swallow. But like the more I think about it, the more I kind of get it. I only ever signed up to Disney Plus for The Mandalorian, which means I paid $8 a month for a couple months just for one show. Well, I mean, I guess I expected more, and I surfed around in Disney Plus and didn't find a lot of stuff that I liked. So that's part of it too. But
you mean you didn't rewatch the entire X-Men the animated series?
I did, but I can do that anyway.
Well,
but no, I did do that. But yeah, I'm looking at this really expansive list of delayed movies, and most of these are like whatever, right? Like I've never heard of The Artist's Wife. Sounds artsy, might be good. But like Artemis Fowl, that looked bad. The reviews are that it is bad. Black Widow, I would not pay $30 to watch. A Quiet Place Part 2, I wouldn't watch for free. I'll probably end up watching it, but it doesn't seem that interesting. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, no. There's a Dungeons and Dragons movie? No, absolutely not. Escape Room 2, did not know about that. Would need to watch Escape Room 1, probably. None of these movies are like, I would pay $30. Like, I'm kind of interested in Godzilla versus Kong because Godzilla ended up being like kind of entertaining, which I didn't expect. Let's see.
Well, like they're pointing out like movies like Wonder Woman 1984 and all that. The King's Man. The King's Man, which is supposed to be a Kingsman prequel, I believe.
But only like one of the Kingsman movies was good, right? Like I don't know if I trust the prequel to be that good.
No, yes, I'm not advocating it, but
yeah, people are talking about Wonder Woman.
Maybe the new Bond movie. Maybe the new Bond movie if it was really interesting.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I guess I'm no longer like crazy into Bond. So I don't know if I'd pay $30. Oh, here it is. No, that was moving from April 8th, 2022 to October 7th, 2022. So it doesn't even count. But Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse sequel. Yeah, I'd pay $30 to watch the sequel. Oh my God. Absolutely.
Well, there you go.
Probably wouldn't have to because it's moving from a 2022 date to a different 2022 date.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you've enjoyed it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So finishing up safeties, which is the last position group in the training camp preview. Everything else is up over the Athletics. So I've got, for people unfamiliar, it's a scouting report on every non-specialist on the Vikings roster, including ones that they acquire or attempt to acquire partway through writing the series. And so list their strengths, weaknesses, and a small blurb about kind of who they are as a player. So you can get a kind of rundown on everybody in camp before camp starts. So about to wrap that up. By the time you listen to this, I'll have probably been halfway done with safety. So that's going to be published soon. So every other position group is up. So head over to The Athletic for that.
All right. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back soon with another episode. So until then, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to always bring your wine towel. And we will see you soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.